Hello and welcome to the West Yorkshire Football Show live. I'm Steven Browne and we're here discussing all things Leeds United. And joining us is Sporting Life's Tom Carnduff. Tom, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's been a couple of weeks since we last spoke. I was trying to pinpoint exactly when we last had you on the show, but it certainly didn't feel like a big crisis like things currently are at the moment. I mean, we've not spoken for a few weeks. I'm interested to get your take on how you felt about things at half-time onwards against Crystal Palace and then Liverpool the other night. I mean, where's your head at it with? Can you even describe what happened and what's gone wrong?
Yeah, bizarre's the word, isn't it? It's just completely bizarre. You say half-time at Palace there because in that first half, it was completely fine. They were playing very well. They could have scored 2 or 3. I mean, it was just set-piece chaos in that game where Leeds looked like scoring at every free kick and corner they had. Palace looked like scoring down the other end at the same situation. And then obviously the second half, I just not entirely sure what exactly happened there. It just seemed to be an effect of concede one, concede again, and then the game looked lost. And even at 3, it looked like the result seemed beyond them, and heads dropped, and Palace just completely made the most of it. And then Liverpool come up, and the exact same thing happens where they concede 2 in pretty quick succession, and even with the goal going back, it really couldn't capitalise on anything. It was a really passive performance there. And I know it was Monday night and there was a bit more of a gap between the 2 games, but that's 2 consecutive games that if those results were weaved in with other wins, draws or whatever, it wouldn't look as bad. But back to back, I said it on Monday night and I kind of tweeted on Monday night, they definitely look like a team that are going down. I'm not saying that they necessarily will, but in terms of how they appear, that just looks like a team that are completely beaten at the moment, and it's not the time to do so. The positive is that there are other teams down there as well who are struggling just as much, and there are games that they've got to turn it around in. But to put that kind of performances and the attitude that they look like, across those 2 games, it's not the great time to be doing it. And it's, a situation where they've gone backwards now. They've gone backwards for the last 2 years, and, they're now in this situation again. The only difference with this year and last year is there's a couple more teams involved, so there's at least that, but it's just not looking good at the moment, and they need to try and get over it, and they need to try and get over it quickly because you don't want to be in this situation come to that last game of the season.
I mean, trying to figure out exactly what has happened and has caused this collapse, I just don't get it, because Javi Gracia comes in and makes the improvements we were crying out for, really. Bit more pragmatism, different tactical adjustments depending on the opponent, and everything looked to be going great. We beat the teams we needed to beat. We hauled ourselves up the table, and at half-time we're sitting pretty against Crystal Palace. I mean, there's rumours of infighting going on. Obviously, Verba being out has not helped, but I mean, can you put your finger on what has actually happened to cause such a mess in the last 2 games?
I think you've got to remember that even with the couple of results and the win over Forest and stuff like that this was still kind of, the problems were still going to be there in terms of the results and things like that. They weren't completely out of the relegation picture, until you get to about 37, 38, you're truly safe in this picture. I still maintain that I think 35 is probably going to keep you up. I mean, the infighting and stuff like that, the way I kind of see it, and whenever this comes out, and you always hear training ground bust-ups and things like that, I'm not saying at Leeds, but just mean in general, when you hear these stories, it's usually half-time of games or after bad results or on the training ground. I mean, Bayern Munich had one, didn't they, at Man City, where they punched someone. That's a bit more severe.
They were subbed, weren't they, last night in the game? They came off.
Yeah, which is, high fives and move on. But it's stuff like that and arguments between players. It's so common. It's a lot more common than you think it is in football. It's just that you only really hear about it when kind of teams are up against it, or there's a little bit of a narrative to kind of play along with, that there's a desire to find that out. But it happens so often up and down the country at every club. At some point, it will have happened on the training ground, disagreements, players going together, because ultimately they're elite level athletes who want to win all the time. And, it's the same in any workplace. You throw people together. It's not necessarily like they're choosing to be together and hanging around. You've kind of thrown some people together and just hoping they get along. So I think that's probably not something that I'd say is the issue behind it. It's just fundamentally a squad that's been put together that's not necessarily been well built, to be brutally honest again. The depth is there, particularly in the midfield area, but in terms of the building of it, it's not particularly been where it needs to be at the moment. The same for the defence, that has just not performed for the last 3 years, really, since being in the Premier League, that it's just never really been an area that looks too certain. And it's not really been an area that has had too much change to it since promotion. Obviously, from that first summer, I know they looked at kind of the fullback areas over the past 2 summers, but in terms of the central areas, Max Verber's the only one who's come in. I think, hasn't he, as a senior centre-back figure. And that kind of shows where they're at in terms of that. So, yeah, it's probably just where the squad is at the moment. And, the Grazia looked like he had things sorted, but fundamentally you can look in the stats and stuff like that, but you've got to take into account where Leeds are at, right? They're a team that, if battling relegation, the numbers are never going to look pretty anyway. But in terms of the eye test and how they were doing in those games that they should have won, the Forest, Southampton, chuck Wolves away into there as well, they did well. They were playing well. They were creating chances. They were limiting the opposition. Wolves really only came into life when they were 3-0 down. And that's where kind of stats and numbers can be somewhat deceptive. Same with Leicester at Man City. Leicester, their chances were all coming at 3-0 down. Yeah. So even though the top line numbers say, it was quite an even game, it's not really the same when you put the context into it. So, yeah, they've done well up to this stage. It's just a bad couple of weeks, isn't it? Fundamentally, it's a bad couple of weeks. If it didn't come back to back, like I said, it wouldn't have mattered as much. If they can just put it aside and brush it aside, starting with Fulham, then people probably won't even remember this happened, that Leeds got absolutely annihilated at games last season. They lost 7-0 at one point last season. Yeah. Nobody really remembers or discusses it because it didn't matter in the end. So they need it to be the same this year.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of how Grassi is handling the situation? From his comments, it's almost as if these 2 games have potentially ruled him out of getting the job permanently. I mean, where do you think his head is at with the situation, and what can he do to kind of get it back on board, so to speak?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I suppose any manager at any club will see bad results from the very top. It's happened downwards. So when you inherit a squad that's battling relegation, it's a big ask to get results and turn it round so these things don't happen. I mean, Palace was the one where you go, right, that's the eye raiser there, that Liverpool, as bad as they've been all season away from home, and I really thought that Monday night was a game Leeds would target and think we could win this here, because away from Anfield, they have struggled. They have not got the results they wanted to. But fundamentally, that's still a team that on their day can do that to opponents. Not too long ago, they put 7 past Man United. I know it was at Anfield, but they still scored a hell of a lot of goals. So when they want to do it, they can do it. So it's probably the Palace one that you kind of look at and say, okay, that's the concern. But yeah, I don't know. For me, it always felt like, even though he is technically the manager, isn't he, Gracia? There's no interim about it. It's his job. He is the person in charge. It always felt like one of those where they were going to get to the summer and there's probably higher targets that they want. They were so, not the club, but in terms of the reports and how it came out, it was so clear the direction they wanted to go in after Marsh, in terms of the style of head coach that they wanted. They kind of wanted to continue that high pressing front foot type football. It didn't come around. I can't see them completely abandoning that anyway. They've built a squad, or wanted to build a squad, that in theory could play that style of football. So when you've got someone else in who's not doing that all the time, it effectively makes certain players redundant in a way, and big money signings that have been bought in to play one way, less than 9 months later, 6 months later, they're basically in a situation where it's not working like that and they're going to struggle. So I think, unless it went ridiculously well and Leeds were pushing top half in the end, I think Grazia was always going to be someone who probably would struggle in terms of the full-time audition. You feel like their eyes would have been elsewhere, and you imagine behind the scenes, it's working like that as well anyway, looking for that summer change. But yeah, it's incredibly tricky now knowing that, you've got to give him the benefit of the doubt that these aren't his players, that this is a squad he's inherited. And there's players like Tyler Adams, Max Verber, who have been key and been missing. But fundamentally, this is a team that he has had to he knows the situation he walked into. And they're going to look at these two games and probably think defensively that there's been no signs of improvement. Scoring goals was never an issue for Leeds. It's the structure, isn't it? And it probably has ruled him out. But then, like I said, I don't think unless it went ridiculously well, he was ever going to be top of the list anyway. They made it very clear that it's this weird flexible contract, which there's got to be a break clause of some kind in there in the summer in case it doesn't go well. So yeah, it won't have helped. It won't have helped, but I don't think it would have been up there anyway.
Does it impact players? Do you think they think, well, this guy is just temporarily here? Is that a potential issue that's affecting things?
It's tricky, really. Maybe, but then equally, the amount of players that, fundamentally, so many players just act professionally anyway, that they're so used to, and especially the modern day, not like I'm some 70-year-old guy going, it's better when football was in the 60s or whatever. But it is that clubs go through managers so much now that modern players, you just have to adapt to it. And it doesn't matter the situation, it's regardless, because they never know that Gracia could be the permanent manager in the summer. We don't know what the next direction would be. And if he keeps Leeds up, then maybe they'll go, well, Leeds have finished 6 points clear of the drop zone in the end because of the way it worked out, or 3 points or whatever. So he actually deserves a go. And if you've kind of approached it as a player with the attitude of, well, this guy's not going to be here in next season anyway, it's irrelevant, then you've probably put yourself in a bit of a bad situation. So I don't think it will, and it shouldn't anyway, because he's the manager. This is the person that's been brought in, and you've just got to adapt to it now that, the squad didn't perform to the levels it should have previously. So this is why the situation has arose. So I don't think it will affect them too much, and it shouldn't affect them too much, really, because that's just a part of football. This happens everywhere.
When I was watching Leeds for the last couple of games, they looked to me like a team without an identity. This kind of mishmash of this high pressing style that they used to have under Bielsa, the man marking, that kind of crazy El Loco system. And then it was followed up with Marsh, which again was very aggressive, very high intensity. And now it just seems to me that although it did work for a few games, there just really doesn't seem to be an identity on the pitch. What do you think he does going forward? Would you make major changes to the lineup? Would you try different formations? McKennie and Rocker they've not really been able to grab hold of games the last couple of matches. What do you think? Would you make some big changes kind of going into that Fulham game, do you think?
It's tough, isn't it? Because ultimately you've got to try not to get too carried away. It's, fans can go one way, but when you're actually in there and you're the one running it, you've got to be very level-headed a lot of the time. And it's just because of the way it's come about, right? That you've effectively played a top team who I know aren't on it, but have a very expensively built squad, a very expensively built attack with some world-class players involved in that attack. And when it clicks, they can brush anyone aside. And they've done it to more than one team. They beat Bournemouth 9-0 this season. So for all of their issues, and yes, those games are at Anfield, Liverpool remain a very high-class unit. And then you've got, as happens in football, freak results that nobody can particularly explain why they happen, but they do happen. That you're always going to be the victim of them. You're always going to be the beneficiary of them. Over time, it just happens, and nobody can really explain why it happens. And to have them back to back, then that probably makes the questions come in more prominently than they would have. I don't think it will force them into a change of approach, because maybe correctly in a relegation battle, Leeds are playing the opposition rather than going, this is the way we want to do it, and this is the way we want to do it, and this is the way we want to do it over and over again. Like under Marsh, when teams make one little change, all Forest did was put Sergio Aurier on at right back and completely nullify Willy Gnonto, and Leeds had no idea in Marsh's last game what to do. So they've kind of been correct in that approach for where they're at in the table. And I don't think the past two results while it may change some personnel, the likes of Max Verber, Nonto, who he's been speaking about today as being kind of protective over as he returns from injury, maybe he wants to play them and he'll bring them back in. But I don't think they'll fundamentally change how they were going to approach these games anyway, because they're almost playing the opposition. And, we'll kind of look at that. I know he spoke about being more aggressive, and I suppose him playing Fulham already in a competitive game in the Cup will be a good measure of it, where Leeds played very well and were somewhat unfortunate not to progress in that competition. That at least there's a reference point there. So I think we'll see kind of what happens at the weekend, but I can't see on the back of the last two results. I'm not saying the need for change, because obviously something needs to change. They can't keep going on, but almost from that kind of inside Leeds angle, that you wouldn't want them to get thinking we've got to tear up the entire plan and that's it, that on the back of what is effectively a freak result and then a high-class unit have completely tore you apart because they've come back to back, and there's not a great deal you can do about that in terms of the fixtures. So yeah, I think they've got to stick to whatever the approach was going to be to Fulham anyway. You've got to stick with it, because even a point at Fulham, that's suddenly a positive result. Everything looks a bit better. Fundamentally, they couldn't then end the weekend in the relegation zone either. And it just looks a little better than if they can get at least a point in that game.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Where do you stand on the Ilan Melia debate? I mean, Jamie Carragher was critical of him on Monday Night Football, saying, it looks like a kid in net. There's an argument to say he's not really progressed and developed over the last couple of seasons, really. I mean, it's a tricky one. I mean, we've got Joe Robles as the backup. Do you bring him in? I mean, where do you stand on that situation?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it, with Melia, who has been very good in the past for Leeds and has come up big at times. And, you kind of look at the analytics and stuff like that, and it's never been good for Melia anyway, to be honest, since promotion to the Premier League. But on the eye test, there have been games in the past seasons where he has been very good, and you can't see it really matching up. I think this season it's almost been hidden away slightly because the whole team's not been performing particularly well, but he's had a bad season, and it's starting to be exposed a little bit now. That it's not a good sign that when you feel as a team, if the opposition gets a shot on target, it's probably going to go in. That's not a great feeling. And fundamentally, it's true at the moment, these past two games.
Yeah.
You have a shot on target, it's going in. Like, what Liverpool had 6 or whatever it was on Monday night, they all went in. It's not a great feeling to be. And I don't know what it is. You don't know what's kind of going on for a lot of people. Whether there's, the transfer rumours that have been so prominent, more and more prominent, I should say, as the kind of time's gone on in the Premier League, because he's young, but he's still now very experienced top flight goalie, really. This is his third season playing there. He obviously had a stretch in the Championship as well during the run-in for that. I don't know. I think is it a case of, he's just in a bad run of form like everyone, and you need to, like some players, you just need to play them through the bad form. But when you're a goalkeeper, if you're in bad form, you can't hide away from it. The Robles one's interesting because obviously they've now got a very experienced goalie. That they were always kind of, as with the whole makeup of the squad, they've always looked at resale value and young players who can develop. They obviously felt the need to get an experienced head in there, because they've obviously looked at Christopher Classen and thought, we're not too sure if Melia got injured, for example, he could be a goalie for the stretch. So I don't know, is it maybe even worth not just for Melia himself, we've seen Brighton have done it recently, haven't they? Leicester have done it. A lot of teams are just changed up the goalkeeper, and Leicester have been one of the bigger ones who are down there as well who have done it. Is it worth doing it just to give the entire the team a bit of a kick as well? To say, while it's tough because you obviously got to protect him, but if Grazia comes out and says we're not blaming Ilan here, but this needs to be a real kick to the entire team, that that nobody's undroppable, our number one could be taken out, that it needs to improve, and maybe it's a more experienced head as well to kind of organise that back line a little better, because that's what they need. I mean, at this stage, it's almost like you don't want to get to the point of saying there's no harm in doing so, but maybe it is a tactical one that works for non-tactical reasons, if that makes
Yeah,
sense,
yeah.
not footballing reasons, that gives everyone a little bit of a kick. So yeah, it's been bad form. And at what point do you kind of say that this has to change and we can't afford it to keep going on as it is? And I wouldn't be against it. I wouldn't be against it, even if it is just for one game, just to take him out the spotlight a little bit as well and protect what is a young player and a young goalkeeper who will develop in the future. So I wouldn't be against it, I think, at all at this stage, with an experienced backup there, just to try and help get things a little bit more organised, and would coincide with Max Verber coming back into the back line as well. So it could be a decent combination in terms of those little changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Gracia was asked about leaders in the team. This has been another big debate this week about Leeds. Is there enough leaders in the team? I think Gracia said, in his opinion, there are different leaders in different ways. Where do you stand on that? I mean, we've not seen Liam Cooper get back in the team at all. He is arguably one of our biggest leaders, captain of the club. Debate about how kind of chatty he is on the field and whatnot, but yeah, what do you think? Have we got enough leaders at Leeds, or is that something we're severely lacking in?
Yeah, I mean, in my eyes, I think for years Liam Cooper has been the leader at Leeds, regardless of what people think of him as a Premier League player. He is the leader at Leeds. I think it probably stretches all the way back to Christensen being at the club as the head coach. When Leeds had that period of Christensen wouldn't say who the captain was. And you were asking him in press conferences all the time, who's the captain or who is it? And he'd always kind of palm it off. But through all of that and throughout multiple managerial changes, it was always Liam Cooper who was the one that the players wanted to be the leader, to be the captain, and has always been looked at club captain and things like that. So having him around definitely is someone who, there's no doubting his leadership abilities. And obviously Rodrigo, I think under Marsh, really then got bought into that leadership experienced group, which for a player like him who's played at the top level, played for his country, a very good footballing country as well, is probably a good one to bring in as well. I think there are players there. It's just that balance, isn't it? That Leeds are a young squad, and I think as a leadership group, in theory, it should have got better based on the additions they've made. The likes of Verber, who has played in the Champions League. Tyler Adams captains his country, the USA, which is massive country in terms of geography, but a country that is starting to develop in football or soccer again. They're getting into being a really good footballing team again now at the moment. So the leaders should be there.
Yeah.
It's probably just the absences of when none of them are on the pitch, then who steps up, as it has been. There's been no Verber, no Cooper, no Adams, no Rodrigo at times as well. I don't think it's enough to have one. You need obviously multiple people to be there, and obviously Leeds are suffering from those absences that they've got, and there's not a great deal they can do at the moment.
No, absolutely. Jason, who we have on this show regularly as well, is I'm listening as I'm doing some work, not looking forward to Saturday at all. Don't feel any better than I did directly after Monday night. No, it's exactly the same, to be honest, mate. Definitely. If you could click your fingers and he would agree to it, would you have Marcelo Bielsa back in charge? I know this is really horrible, and it's an insane, pointless question, but I've got to admit I've been reminiscing about Bielsa a little bit this week. I've seen various clips from like press conferences and stuff on Twitter, and I'm just there thinking, oh God, look what we had.
Yeah, no, not for me, to be honest. As much as we're all in love with the Bielsa era at Leeds and how fantastic it was, and they were as a team just unbelievable. That first season in the Premier League, behind closed doors, but they were phenomenal, and they were pushing for Europe by the end of it. Like, nearly snuck into Europe at the very end. I think you've got to, I suppose the same with anything nostalgia wise, right? That you always think of the positives and the good times and things like that. That it ended so badly in the end that you look at this Leeds defence now. That was one of the worst defences the Premier League's seen in a long time by the end of it. They were shipping goals for fun. They were so easy to play against. It wouldn't be a solution. I think, that you've got to almost move on, haven't you? And you all, as well, it's almost protecting what there is, right? If he came back and it carried on going wrong, then how much of people look towards the more recent times in the future? But I could see why people always want to go back to the kind of ones that, yes, they bought the good times before, but it just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't work, would it, at this stage?
No chance. Enjoy Uruguay, Marcelo. Enjoy Uruguay.
Yeah, we'll all support Uruguay from now
Yeah,
on.
exactly. Yeah.
We've got that.
It'd be interesting actually. I wonder if, because with the amount of goals conceded last season and this season, I wonder if there's ever been a team that's conceded more goals than Leeds over a 2-season period. I mean, it just feels like we've got to be breaking that record at some point.
Yeah, usually teams probably get relegated by that stage. But
yeah, exactly.
Leeds have always had the fact, like Leicester this season, they can score goals, so maybe that bails you out a little bit and you can get away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we go then, very quickly, predictions for the Fulham game, Tom. Very difficult to say, but what does your gut think will happen?
It's a tough one. Obviously, form comes into play, but you almost want to look at it as a game-by-game thing. And Fulham, even, I suppose from very early on in the season, they've done well. But since then, it's been a team that I'm not entirely sure on. I think they're not entirely sure on their team at the moment either. They've been dropping out of those European places. The Mitrovic suspension. I think last week, obviously, they had a very good result at Everton. They played Dan James as a striker that game. That worked pretty well for them as an attacking unit. They obviously can't do that this weekend. So there's, again, another enforced change that come in there. I think it all depends on the reaction of Leeds. And if they can just blank out the last 2 games and just pretend they never happened, I think they've got every chance of doing so. You know, it's all the psychology of that. More than anything, if there's a hangover from Monday night and the previous Sunday, then obviously it's going to be incredibly tough. But I can't see why they can't go and get something from that game. You know, it's not the Fulham of the first half of the season. They are there to be got at. The results haven't been there for them in recent weeks. And, you know, it's there for Leeds that a minimum of point. I mean, if like Wolves, if they can win, then suddenly the picture changes, the conversation changes, and they're probably within 1 win and maybe a draw of safety. So, yeah, it's definitely a fixture they should target, and I think it's definitely a fixture they can get something out of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the doom and gloom, I'm thinking, you know, they could actually win, and if they do, it puts it in a completely different spin. Tom, thank you very much for joining us. If you've enjoyed the video, please do pop a like and also subscribe to the channel for more Leeds United content. Tom, really appreciate you joining us, mate. We'll speak to you again soon.
No worries.
Thank you. Bye-bye.